Hi there, my name is Steven, and I'm here to teach you a little bit about what I do for a living. Why do you care? Well, you probably don't. I'm a software engineer, primarily in business applications. I've done a little bit of integrated IoT stuff, some Raspberry Pis, some C++, C, manufacturing level stuff, firmware, tiny bit here and there. But primarily I write in the .NET language with C#. I'm not the greatest programmer out there, and I'm not certainly the worst programmer out there, but I've always really wanted to start a YouTube channel, and I've always really wanted to share what I know. I know a lot of different things, a little bit about a whole lot. So jack of all trades, master of none kind of deal, but my career has been in software engineering. So that's what I'm going to start you off with today. If you're interested in .NET programming, primarily for Windows, if you're not familiar with what the framework is, that's fine. I'm here to start from bare minimum and work you up to where you want to be. Well, hopefully. I've got about 6.5 to 7 years-ish of experience, again, doing several different kinds of programming in a few different languages. Python, C#, a little bit of Java, a lot of database programming, SQL, MySQL, some Postgres, some MariaDB, not a ton, and a little bit of document-based from Mongo. I've had exposure to Couchbase, but not a ton. Like I said, a little bit of knowledge about a whole lot of things. So today I figured, let's start with something I really know quite well, and that is C# and the .NET framework. So I don't have the best setup, so you hear some clicking here and there, but we'll work past that hopefully. So here I've got Visual Studio 2019 Community. This is not professional, this is not enterprise, I have not paid for this. This is a free software that you can download from Microsoft. I'll probably put a link in the description below. You can download this. It does take a lot of time. Depending on your internet connection, it can take a couple of hours. Some people can get it knocked out in, I think, half hour at the least. And it depends on the modules that you want to install, because Visual Studio is made for a lot more than just C# and .NET. Now they've integrated with Xamarin. Microsoft actually purchased a company called Xamarin that allows you to do cross-platform development with Android and iOS, as well as the Windows Core experience, or the Windows Universal experience, which is what you would commonly associate with like Windows 8 apps and Windows Store apps. So they also have web development things like ASP.NET for that architecture, MVC, and all of those options. It all depends on what kind of development that you want to go with, what you're looking to do. There's a lot of web stuff out there. There's a lot of material out there to learn web stuff. I'm not overly familiar with ASP.NET. I've done a decent amount of it, but a lot of it has been just self-taught. I took a class in college. My professor was awful. He just had us copy and paste. We never actually learned anything. So if I'm going to teach you ASP.NET, I'm probably going to be learning a lot of it alongside of you. That works sometimes, that doesn't. And actually, a lot of the tutorials that I'm hoping to put up on this channel will be stemmed from an experience of mine, hoping to learn alongside you. In fact, when we go into Python at some point, which I really want to do, we're going to be going over that stuff with probably a Raspberry Pi, and that means that I'm not super familiar with that technology, so we'll be learning that together. And there's a lot of give and take there. So if you have questions, if you have problems, if you're running into things, throw it in the comments below. I'll try to get to it as best I can. Again, not an expert on a whole lot here, so I will give you the best I've got, or try to point you in the right direction. Visual Studio 2019 is an amazing tool that integrates a lot of performance analytics and allows you to do a whole lot of programming without having to write a ton of code. That doesn't come into play with the basics so much, but it does come into heavy play when you get into more advanced things, especially when it comes to refactoring or analyzing and understanding other code. It's an extensible program that allows you to do plugins or install plugins on it that analyze code lens and highlight your code in different ways. I've been using Visual Studio since the beginning of my school back in 2012. It's 2020 now, just to date the video a little bit. Actually, you can probably see that in the date code. But it is, or I've been doing this but I've been doing this for probably about 8 years for actual programming in .NET. So C# is the language that I started out doing in college, and I've evolved past that a little bit, not a ton actually. There are a lot of places that are looking for good Windows developers, whether it be a core experience or a hatless experience for servers, or it be an end user utility. If you're using Visual Studio, it's an end user utility of sorts. So I have almost the full package for Visual Studio 2019 Community installed. I'm not doing functional programming whatsoever. I've decided that I don't really want to do functional programming at this juncture. Maybe that's something we can learn later on. Feel free to throw it in the comments below if you want to see that kind of content. I'm more than happy to look at R or F# or whatever the functional programming language of the day is. You'll see a couple of my ridiculous programs here. I've played around with OCR, which is Tesseract. ACR is another kind of optical character recognition program for reading pictures and getting the text out of them. MTG Search, I'm a big Magic the Gathering fan. I don't know a ton of the lore, I'm learning that as we go, but I wanted to make a Xamarin app that allowed you to look up cards and compare their prices on certain websites. MTG Card Lookup is another one. Quick Web Engine was from one of my old jobs, so that we won't get into. I won't be looking at that code at all. Today, my hope is really just to kind of familiarize you with some of the shortcuts, some of the handiness of Visual Studio 2019, and hopefully in the next video that we do, we'll get into a little bit more of how to code in basics. Again, if you're an advanced user or an advanced programmer, you're probably not going to want to watch this video because it's going to be really basic and it's probably going to feel like a waste of time. It's going to be a slow-paced thing. So, that being said, let's get rolling into Visual Studio. Basically, what you're going to want to install for your packages is going to be your .NET Core and your .NET Framework, because I'm going to be teaching you in desktop. That's what I'm most familiar with, and it's what I use the most. So, from the screen, this is the splash screen, we're going to create a new project. Real difficult. This is where all of your project types are available. You can install more features, tools, etc. if you want to, but let's go over a couple of different project types, because we'll get into console apps a little bit, probably in the next video, for those basics, for understanding what variables are, how to use them, what different primitives there are, and again, we'll discuss what primitives are. Console apps are only what you see like this. Linux days coming back to me. So you might see things like this. Don't really want to do that. But you can ping things. The idea is, you don't really have much of a graphical user interface. It's all text-based. Your outputs are going to be like this. Nothing really complicated. It's really straightforward, at least on the surface. There are some point-of-sale systems that you'll see in larger chains or banks that still use a text-based interface. They're really handy because they're super low budget as far as they don't take a whole lot of RAM, they don't take a whole lot of hard drive space usually. A lot of them are database centric, and you can usually, because you don't have to wait for graphics to load, you can just hit a number and go to a menu item. That's the biggest and most beautiful functional edge that console apps really give you. Part of my experience has been designing applications from the ground up, conceptualizing all the way through releasing maintenance. I keep hitting my ring on my desk and I apologize. But there's a huge amount of work that goes into understanding what kind of application you need to make. Do you need to make a web app, a desktop app, a console app, or a multi-platform or cross-platform application with a single code base? What kind of databases are you going to use? How are you going to release the installer? Are you going to publish it on a store? Are you going to just have a janky exe download from the internet that half the people have to turn off Smart Screen to do? And you can't do that for businesses because IT departments lock that down. A lot of things to consider. A lot more than what we're going to get into today, but you'll hear some of those considerations come across in the videos that I make, because that's what I do. I've been doing that for 6 years alongside, because I've always worked for small shops, and for the last couple of jobs that I've had, other than the one I'm at right now, I've been the only developer or a one-man team of some sort doing development operations and release management, things like that. So you'll hear a lot of that experience kind of roll around in what I'm telling you and how I'm going about instructing. A little bit convoluted, I apologize. Well, now that that's out of the way, you kind of know a little bit about my background. I'm still really new to making videos. I've done some streaming here and there, but I'm not super comfortable on camera. So again, I apologize. I feel like Ricky Bobby. I don't know what to do with my hands. So that's what a console app is. ASP.NET Core application. You can read these little descriptions here. You can see project template for creating ASP.NET Core web apps and web APIs. Basically, core usually means that it doesn't have a graphic user interface. It's usually services or handshake items that take data, format it, or manipulate it in some way, and then send it to something to display that data to a user. We're not going to get into that. I don't do any Blazor apps currently because I'm not overly familiar with it. Class libraries are kind of that same deal as the ASP.NET Core, except they are code that can be deployed via what's known as a DLL, or a dynamically linked library of commands and interface items for other programs. WPF is what I'm most familiar with. It is a desktop application that gives you an XML-like user interface designer, and then there's Windows Forms apps, which are right here. And that I'm also very familiar with because that's what I started on. That's actually what I use at my current job. As we move to a newer technology, our legacy systems are still running on Windows Forms, and that is actually pretty common for legacy systems like that. A lot of people or a lot of companies have spent a lot of money in the past to develop custom applications, and they all stem from that. And because Windows Forms has been around since .NET has been around. Don't quote me on that. It's been around a long time. So personally, I would like to stick with WPF apps. If you would like me to go over Windows Forms, we can absolutely do that. They are simple to get up. Actually, you know what? Forget it. We're going to do a Windows Forms app because it's simple, it's straightforward. We'll cover WPF in another video and some of the comparisons and contrasts there. Some of the contrasting qualities, because there's enough different to make it difficult or a steep learning curve or adjustment period, but there's not enough there in the back end of the code that really makes it that much more difficult. Data binding, for me personally, is a little bit more awkward in Windows Forms, but that's okay. We can learn that one together because I haven't done a whole lot of binding in Windows Forms apps. Again, legacy systems, not really greatly supported for that. A lot of people are going to argue with that statement. So, in the event that we were to choose a WPF app, which one do you choose? .NET Framework or .NET Core? And so, it takes a little bit of wearing the glove to get familiar with the glove. .NET Framework has a certain number or a certain set of libraries that you can pull in via what's known as NuGet. We can pull those in and we can play with different tools that other people have made on a regular basis by using NuGet. And that's wonderful. But .NET Core uses totally different libraries, more often than not. Different technology that's more what you're going to see from like Windows apps and things like that. So we're going to stick to the Windows Form app.NET Framework for now. It is worth also noting that if you know what you're doing and you know what you want to do, You want to strip everything out. You might be coming from the Linux world and you want everything super basic. You want only the most basic and integrated items or libraries pulled into your application. Blank apps are fine. That's kind of where you go for that. There's no linked references to your projects or things like that. And that's fine. But I do suggest that you know what you're doing in order to do that. Because there's I do suggest that you know what you're doing there, because there's a lot that can go into creating an app from blank. Again, you're starting from a very basic foundation and building the house. You're not starting from a built house and renovating a kitchen kind of deal. Now, we're not starting with somebody else's code in this case. Whole different topic, because every programmer has a language or a colloquialism of their own. Everybody talks differently with code. So I talk in one way, you're going to talk in a totally different way. And that is through experience. And I mean, it's just like you and I talking English from, say, the Midwest to English spoken in Europe. There are dialects there, and it's going to feel very different going from this developer to that developer, this engineer to that engineer, or this architect to that architect. It also depends on their background and yours. So let's start with the Windows Forms app. We'll hit next. First application. We're not doing anything important here. We're just getting the feel for the IDE, which is Integrated Development Environment. Visual Studio 2019 is that IDE. That is what is that's what those programs are known as. So we're going to throw it in our repos. We'll go over source control another time. .NET Framework 7 or 4.7.2. That's fine. And here we are. I have an update already. Although my camera is blocking that for you guys. So this is kind of what Visual Studio 2019 looks like. There's a lot there. And there's a lot more there than you think. Exploration is going to be a key part of this. You really want to make sure that what you're doing is directed. And by that I mean, if you're anything like me, you learn better when you have a project. We're not doing anything crazy here yet. We'll decide on what kind of application we want to make out of this moving forward. And that should not be too difficult. So because we haven't decided what program we want to make yet or what we want to do with our program, we're going to start with just some real basic things. Again, showing you Visual Studio 2019 and the basics thereof. This is what's known as your designer. This is a beautiful interface that I've noticed a lot of IDEs struggle with. There are a couple that have some really nice ones, but Visual Studio, in my opinion, has the best one that I've come across. Because you can go up to View, and I never do this because I always do it out of my keyboard shortcuts. Should be Toolbox, WX. So you can hit Control, hit and hold Control, then hit W and then X. And that'll bring up this toolbox. And you can pin all of these panes together. You can drag them around and dock them anywhere in the screen. So I've got this pane. You can dock it to center. You can dock it halfway in the pane evenly. You can dock it to the top, left, right, up, down, wherever you want to do it. I tend to keep my panes together. And when you drag it into the center, it will be a tab down in the bottom. You'll see in the lower left here where my cursor is, right above the word ready. Now what's nice about this is they have these roll-ups here that you can expand, and we're going to do common controls. Common controls that, I don't know how Microsoft determined that people are using web browsers internally. It's hard to know. Personally, I don't use the web browser plugin a whole lot because it uses Microsoft Edge or Microsoft Internet Explorer, and I can't stand that. There are ways of implementing Chromium based and Blink based, I think it is, browsing technologies in if you really want to do that. Again, be careful, resources tend to sap on those. In this case, I just want to bring in a text box. So a text box is going to be something that you can drag and drop. Any of these controls can be dragged and dropped. And a text box is just a field where people can type. And then you can drag a button in. And these blue lines and pink lines show you your alignment. So when you drag and drop, you have what's known as a relative layout. If you come from the Android world or the Java world, you'll be relatively familiar with a relative layout. In this case, what it means is this control is going to be dependent on the one that you're anchoring or the one that you're putting it next to. The pink line here is showing you that the text is lined up. The bottom of the text is going to be lined up with the text that goes into the text box to the left of it. It gives you some default text here. This window is called your form, and that's why it's called Form 1. You're dragging and dropping into a form. Yes, there are ways to create pop-ups, there are ways to create sub-forms, there are ways to host other applications within your application. The possibilities are really endless. And as you get more familiar with programming, you may find that it's a little overwhelming how allowable so many things are. In this case, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just going to show you kind of what this feels like. You can resize this form. You can make it tiny. You can make it huge, mid-sized, whatever. And you can control where it starts up on the screen, things like that. And we'll do a list box. This is going to be a list of items that just shows up. So you're thinking, well, that's great. Or you might be thinking, that's great. I really like that I can just drag and drop controls from one pane to my form. Great, but I don't want it to be called button 1. That's fine. Click on the control that you want to edit the properties of, and if you don't have the properties pane open, you go to View, and where is it? Control S is one I'm familiar with. It might be in here. Like I said, I don't normally... Oh, there's properties window. Control WP is how I usually open this. I'm really big on the shortcuts that are used in this program because it saves you so much time, as it will with pretty much any program you use on a regular basis. So here are our properties, and they are grouped by general categories. So appearance, accessibility, data, design, etc. You can click this button here underneath the property name. You can hit that and it will do alphabetical if you would prefer that. I've gotten familiar with where they are based on the category that they are. So you want to change the button text, you just search for the text property. That is pretty universal. You'll find in Windows Forms apps that text usually is the displayed text. So your text field that we have here, this text box, we're going to call the .text property, which is just the text property. I call it dot because that's the convention that we use for properties and things like that. Again, all irrelevant at this point, but as it comes across my mind, I'm going to share it with you. I don't have a formalized agenda for this video, if you couldn't tell. So we're going to name this button, or we're going to give this button the text of add value. And once you click off of this or lose focus on that box, it'll change your button. Great. That button also needs a name though. And names for controls can't contain spaces. So if you want to do spaces or something equivalent, you can do underscores. I don't recommend that, and it's not a typical convention. Naming conventions are really important so that people that come in to the job after you or alongside you know relatively what you're doing. So in this case, a huge convention is to create a 3-letter representation of what the control is, and then give it a name. And it's in what's known as camel case. So the first letter of the word or of the name is going to be lowercase, but then if it starts another word, it'll be uppercase. So I'll show you. In this case, we're going to call this button add value. BTN for button, capital A for add, value. So we're right here. Button add value. BTN add value. Capital A, capital V. That's camel case. If I had done a capital B, that is what's known as title case. Also acceptable, but not usually found in modern applications. Although data binding is used a lot, but again, we'll get into that later. Now that that button has a name, we have to name, because we're not doing data binding here, we have to name this, and this will be text, TXT, and we'll call this text value. And then our list box, we'll call it LST values. And you can hit enter to apply that as well. You'll notice the list box contains the name inside of it. That goes away at runtime. Runtime when you actually start the program. So that shows you how to drag controls in and how to edit some of their properties. There are a bunch of properties to play around with. Anchoring is another big one that I recommend you look at. We'll take a look at it at some other time. If you feel like jumping ahead, feel free. I'm not going to stop you. So now we've got this lovely application, and it's probably driving you insane that I have not saved. Control S. If you have multiple windows open that have a bunch of edits to them, you can hit Control Shift S to save all. You may be wondering, how do I know if I haven't saved? You'll see this little asterisk in the tab. That asterisk means that this is an unsaved, or this form or this page has unsaved edits. So just hit Control S, and now it's saved. Make sure to save frequently. I don't think Visual Studio does automatic saving. It might do auto recover, but I don't ever trust auto recover. The name of your solution is here, and if you hover over it, shows you where it is on your computer. That may not seem very important, but it can get really confusing if you have multiple instances of Visual Studio open that have fairly similar looks to them. You might end up accidentally editing one project when you meant to edit another one, and it may take you a while to catch on to that. And we'll get into version control, which helps you after you've already accidentally saved over some changes. That'll be later on though. From here, it's really basic. To run your application, you just hit the start button. We can go into debug, release, etc. later on. I'm not worried about that at the moment, but right now we're just going to hit start. If you come from the Java world, start, like working with Eclipse or NetBeans, usually you'll see a debug button and a run button. Run in that case is very similar to what you call release here, and we have a debug and run, or a debug and release mode for starting. But here's our window. Here's our designer. Here's the actual runtime video. Great, right? And you'll notice I did give this title, but it's still named Form 1. It's okay, it's demonstration. Now, if you want your button to actually do something, there are a couple of ways to do that. We're going to go back to our properties pane here. And you can either go to this lightning bolt here for events. Events are interactions between the user and the interface, or the user interface of the software. And you can choose any of these, and you can double click on this value over here, or you can choose one that's already been made if you have that. The fastest way to do the default, in this case for a button, is going to be a click event. So you can just double click on that, and it will take you to your code behind. And code behind refers to the actual hard code, not the visual editor, and this is where you will be doing all of your programming. I'm not going to get into the details of what I'm about to write, but just know that this is a basic application that's going to take user input from the text box and add it to that list box that we added below. So on our button add value click event, so when button add value is clicked, we're going to type in the name of our list box, list values, dot operator. I mentioned this earlier. Dot depicts or delimits sub-properties or sub-methods of an object. In this case, list values is our list box object, And it has a bunch of properties. So think of like a human being. A human being has typically has eyes, has teeth, has hair, has a hair color. Hair color or color might be the subproperty of hair, which is a subproperty of human. It's a little bit complex to wrap your head around at first, but as you get more familiar or as you work with it, it'll start to click more, especially once you get into custom object creation, which is a little ways out for us, but we'll get there at some point. I promise. In this case, or let me actually say this real quick. Getting into pre-baked controls or pre-made controls like Listbox, you don't always know what is in that control. By typing in the name of your control and hitting dot, Visual Studio offers this great context menu of properties, methods, actions, events, etc., all with their own icons. And it also gives you, for the most part, ways to document or ways to understand what we're going to be entering into. It takes a lot of memorization, especially for controls that you use on a regular basis. Selected items, selected values, selected index, things like that. You just know from doing it for so long. It's like the back of your hand. And so in this case, we're going to be adding an item to the list box. So I'm going to go to my list box, dot, because I want to access the properties and objects therein. Items is the next logical step because we're going to be adding an item. So hit enter and it'll autocomplete, or you can type it out. Now I need to access the sub properties of that, or the actions that I can do with items for the list box. I can clear out items. I can, add items. I can count the number of items that are in the box and put that into a label or into another text box to display how many records there are of something. You can remove at a specific index, which is 0 based. We'll go over that later on. You can add a range of items. You can add several items at once. These starred ones or these starred items are just kind of like bookmarks. They're stuck to the top because those are super common, but there are a bunch of others. Contains is another great one that I use a lot. It's, does this list of items already contain or already have the value I'm about to add? And that'll return a Boolean. Again, we're going to be going into primitives in the next episode because this video is going to be a little bit longer than I would like it to be because I don't know how to shut up. But anyway, we're going to add. You can double click, hit enter, whatever. I think you can hit tab even. Yeah. And now, since add is a method, methods and functions usually start with a verb. Add, delete, insert, update, accrue, fix, adjust, calculate, etc. Because they are doing something. It's not just an item. It's not a noun, a person, place, or thing. It is doing something. It is a function. It is an action for that item or that object. So we're going to add, and functions and methods need parentheses. That's going to be where you pass in what's known as an argument. An argument is a value that is put into a function so that it can take that data or manipulate the values therein and spit out something we want. A little bit foreign concept, but that's okay. So here we're going to do, because we're adding the text of our text box to the list box, we're going to add with our parentheses, and inside the parentheses, we're going to do text, and look, text value pops up. That is the name of our text box. Subproperties, we need the text property of the text box. Otherwise, we're just going to see, I think it's windows.forms.textbox control or something like that gets populated because it just returns the type of object that we're working with. Convoluted, but we're going to do text here because that's what we want. We want the text property of the text box to enter into the items of the list box. If you have questions, throw them in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer as best I can. If I'm not doing well as an instructor, tell me to slow down or let me know if you need more detail on something. I'm still, again, really new to this, and I want to try to provide the most quality for the education or for what you're trying to figure out and learn as possible. Cool? Great. Now, C# is a semicolon and non-white space language, which means indentation doesn't matter as far as how the program will run. It matters because people will hate you if you do weird white spacing and stuff like that. But for the most part, white spacing doesn't matter, other than personal preference and the standards that might be at your workplace or on the project itself, especially if you're doing open source. Semicolons delimit the end of a line. In Visual Studio, you'll see this red squiggle. It's just like when you've misspelled a word in a Microsoft Office. It means that you're missing something. And you can actually hover over this and see semicolon expected. You can go to your error list, which is under View and Error List, Control WE, or Output when you're running, which is View and Output, Control WO. But on the error list, that'll show you all of the things that are preventing your program from running, because otherwise you get this kind of error. It says there were build errors. Would you like to run the last successful build? I almost never run the last successful build. It's pretty rare for me to do that. But I'm going to click no. And I know that I'm missing a semicolon here because I've hovered over where that error is. I'm going to type in my semicolon. The other place that you can see these errors is on the scroll bar on the right above my head. Yeah, right there. So the cool thing about scroll bar showing in Visual Studio is you can right click it, go to scroll bar options, and I love this feature. This feature has been in place since I think 2015, could be just 2017 though. We're going to go use map mode for vertical scroll bar, and I prefer the wide one. What that's going to do is it's going to widen our scroll bar and it's going to show us our code. You can hover over and see a preview of all of our code. Is that not beautiful? Anyway, so you can hover over and see that we got a red squiggly there. Again, we're going to hit semicolon. Great. So now we're going to hit start after saving. Hitting start will actually autosave all of your open edited files. So now we want to type in something like that. We'll add value. Great. So now we've added a value from a text box that somebody's entered, hit a button, and added it to a list. But what if I type in something else? I hit tab there. Windows Forms will automatically determine your tab order based on when the control was added. So we added the text box and then the button and then the list box. If I had added the text box, then the list box, and then the button, I would have tabbed down to the list box and then to the button. Important to know, you can edit that in properties. It's called tab stop, and it is an integer value. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, whole numbers only. So, and it appends the values, not prepends the values. There is a prepend option for the list box, I do believe. But that is how to write a basic program in C# Windows Forms, or rather Windows Forms C#. There is a VB.net that I'm not getting into because I don't know VB.net. So, that's the basics of running Visual Studio. It's not a ton. There's a lot there. There's a whole lot of functionality in Visual Studio that I can't possibly give you all in one class unless the class was like 9 hours long, and I'm not doing that. I don't think I can even upload that long right now. So this is really just a beginning step towards getting familiar with the program. As we get along in writing software in C# and using Visual Studio, I'm really looking for a lot of feedback here. Again, I'm just trying to help a community or help people out so that you can be more familiar. Even if you're not here to learn how to program and you want to just understand what your team is doing at work or what somebody goes through in the process of programming, I'm more than happy to share that experience and what I've done in my profession for so many years. Because there's such an enigma around what software engineers do sometimes, that it's hard to tell people what it's like to be in this experience. So even if you're not here to become a programmer, I still encourage you to follow along, because you never know what's going to be useful, especially if you're a scrum master or you're a manager and you want to know how to better manage your people. It's way easier to do that when you're paying attention or when you're listening to a software engineer talk to you, or how they're handling the code itself. And hopefully at some point we'll be able to go through some of my old code and you'll see examples of how I've done terribly and how I've screwed up projects and how they can be better, because I'd love to refactor some of my old code and now I have an excuse to. But give me feedback, please. I really would appreciate knowing what you want to know more. As we move forward in this series, I'll cover what I'm doing in Visual Studio so that you can more easily find it. I'll try to get more visibility on what my cursor's doing, maybe do the control find cursor thing so I can flash it a couple times so you know where I'm pointing, make things a little bit nicer and cleaner for you. But yeah, that's really it for this video. I know it's run a little bit long and I apologize for that, but these are super basic things for an IDE. Other than that, I am bringing the episode to a close, and I really appreciate you checking out the video. Leave your comments down below, and I hope to get to them as soon as possible, and I appreciate you checking it out. If you learned something today, awesome. That's all I'm really going for. Until next time, thanks.